Hashtag psychotherapy unfogged with Mark Fielding.
Hello, and welcome to Series 5, Episode 21 of Hashtag Psychotherapy Unfold. As you know, I'm your host, Mark Fielding. I'm a relationship counselor and psychotherapist. And today I have the absolute pleasure to interview Marie Alessi, author, best-selling author, TEDx and Keynote Speaker. Just before we kind of get into the interview, I did want to say to our listeners at the end of the last show, I did say that today's show would be the season finale with Joe, but I had to squeeze an interview in with Marie in a bit such an important area. So I'm absolutely chuffed to have you on the show, Marie. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Nice to meet you.
I feel very honored. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Mark. Such a pleasure to be here.
So could we kick off? Could you tell our listeners a little bit about your story?
Sure. I will give you the story in a nutshell because I can only imagine there will be a lot of questions after that. My background is in advertising. I left the corporate world to start a family. I literally left the advertising world when I was pregnant with our first son. And yeah, about maybe 4 years into having a family, having young sons, I started in the self-development industry. I started my own coaching business and I absolutely loved working with predominantly mindset. That was sort of the base of my entire business.
Mm.
And 7.5 years into running that business, my husband went on a business trip and never made it home. Rob passed away from a brain aneurysm out of the blue. There was no pre-warning. We were both in the prime of our lives. We were 45 when it happened.
Mm.
And that was sort of the end and the beginning. You know, there was a really, really pivotal moment, as you can imagine. You know, it was a very, very surreal moment for us finding out about that.
Yeah.
But then also, what do you do with that? I would
Mm.
say that really lays the foundation for our interview today.
Mm. I mean, could I ask you around your initial reaction, Marie?
Oh,
Because
God.
yeah, because
Of course.
so shocking, and Rob was so young. I mean, when you first found out the news, what was your reaction?
It was a very bizarre moment in such that Rob and I were that couple. You know, everybody knew us as that couple. Everybody looked up to us. Everyone was like, oh my God, you guys, you know, we were very, very happy, always very in love. And because of that really strong connection that we had, I knew the entire day there was something not right, and
Mm.
I couldn't get hold of him. I was trying to get in touch, and eventually I was the one who called the hotel he was staying at. And I said, please don't think I'm one of those freaked out wives, you know, stalking her husbands, whatever, but I know there's something not right. Can you please send somebody up to his room? And the moment I said that, I had a split second of a vision of Rob collapsing in a shower. And I remember shaking my head, thinking, don't drive yourself crazy, Marie. Please don't go there. Please don't go there. Yet I said it out loud. I said, and can you please check in the shower? That's all I said. I thought they must think I'm completely crazy.
Yeah,
Yet that's where I found him. And it took another couple of hours before I received the phone call. It was really, um, if I had to sum it up in one word, surreal. It was
yeah,
such a surreal moment.
yeah,
I knew there was something going on and it was something not right, but I didn't think of that at all. You know, that was just surreal hearing that. And the exact sentence was, I'm sorry to inform you that your husband deceased in a hotel room in Perth this morning. It was such a, you know, pull the rug underneath your feet
yeah,
moment.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's just you're going about your normal life. There's plans for the future, and then all of
Yeah.
a sudden, this death comes completely out of the blue. And I think the
Yeah.
kind of numbness and the feeling that this is a bit surreal. I mean, would you say maybe in circumstances where people do pass away really unexpectedly, that is fairly common, that people just can't
Yeah.
process it really initially?
I honestly think it's a way of your, let's go a bit technical here, a bit more in
Yeah.
our industry.
Yes.
It's a way of your subconscious to protect you from the vehemence of that message. Really,
Yeah.
there is everything just turns into slow motion. You
Yeah.
hear it, but to actually process it takes a lot longer,
Yeah, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I wonder, could you maybe say a little bit around reactions of others? I mean, this is something I hear a lot around with when working and interviewing people that have kind of experienced grief and losses. Sometimes
Yeah,
reactions of others can make the grief even more complex. I just wonder,
yeah.
could you say a little bit how others reacted and what that was like for you?
So, I mean, the first people I told were obviously our sons.
Yes,
I needed to share it with them. I did not want them to hear it from, outside or anybody else, because I knew that they were trying to get police to our house to let us know, but we live in a small country town. We don't have a manned police station. So the sergeant eventually had the heart to pick up the phone and tell me, because he could see that I kept ringing and ringing. And he said, We have to tell her. He pretty much broke protocol for me. And I thought, I'm actually very grateful that it happened that way, that I had time to go downstairs and share it with the boys without anybody being in our living room and
yes, yeah,
basically watching them fall apart. There was an
yeah,
absolute falling apart and me holding space for them.
yeah,
I witnessed the exact same thing again when I drove to Rob's parents to tell the news. That was really hard to witness. It
yeah,
was the same thing, his dad pretty much falling apart. His mom, of course,
of
I think
course.
she was the one holding space for him, but they were both falling apart. Yet, in terms of reactions from the outside world, there is a lot of, let me put it that way, in our society, in our culture, I want to say there is a lot of expectation of, you are now falling apart. There is hardly any space for, let's see how she can rebuild herself. Let's see how she can choose
Mm,
uh, more positive ways to deal with
mm,
grief. There is literally that expectation that you now fall apart, and that
mm,
weighs even heavier on you. It
mm.
adds to the heaviness. It doesn't leave space for anything in terms of breathing space, in terms of
Yeah,
allowing sort of happiness into that entire space as well.
yeah,
Happy memories, happy situations that you want to share, anything.
yeah. I mean, I really agree with you. I mean, there is an expectancy that the person that persons that have experienced loss will just kind of fall apart. I mean, that is so true. And in terms of the kind of falling apart and the idea from society around being a widow or widower, is it gendered, would you say? Do you think, I mean, every situation is different, of course, Maria, I know, but just do you think there's a different reaction in terms of
That's a
gender?
really,
Yeah.
really good and very valid question, Mark,
Mm,
because yes, the answer is I do think it's gendered, because I have now worked in this space for about 6 years. I have taken approximately 5,000 people onto their healing journey,
mm,
and it was predominantly women at first, but then I also started working with men, and lots of them widowers. And there is this almost expectation for a widower to remarry rather sooner than later, because you need the nurturing touch and you need somebody to look after the household and the children and all of that. It is so old-fashioned, really
yeah, that
old-fashioned.
really
And
is old-fashioned.
days need to be filled. Who's going to cook your meal? To really simplify it. And it's sad
Yeah.
to see it in such a way. Yet if a woman thinks about remarrying, there is instantly the how dare you, and you need to, it's too soon or too whatever. And it's like, but there is always this expectation, it's too soon, it's too, if you take too long, then it's like, oh, it's too long, you need to move forward. There's always that you need to, you should, you
Mm,
we need to learn as a society to hold space so the person grieving can do it in their own time. And that is not gender specific.
no.
That is really for everyone.
Mm,
And that's where we really fail as a society. We
mm,
don't do that well.
mm. No, I mean, I totally agree with that. I mean, it is, as you know, unfortunately, many things are in society, social, in terms of social construction, really gendered. The expectancy, and also something I hear, and I don't know whether this was your experience or you see this with people that you work with, that
Mm.
people don't know how to engage with somebody's grief. So
Okay.
often at a time when somebody really wants to talk about it, they really
Yeah.
need to talk about it to friends, well, especially if this happens, I think a lot with friends, friends just turn away. They
Mm.
they don't know what to say. They're worried about saying the wrong thing. Sometimes leaving the person who's experienced a loss in a lot of isolation. I don't know, is that something that you see or
I agree.
yeah,
It's and we don't heal well in isolation. We really need
no,
community to surround us, to hold us. I have to say, I was very lucky that I was surrounded with people who really knew how to hold space for me.
yeah,
I also experienced friendships falling apart over that. And
yeah,
one thing that took me a long time, a really long time to learn, and it was painful to learn it, but I did learn that lesson is, and I want to bust the myth here. A lot of people say, oh, you learn who your true friends are when you're grieving. I thought that too at first, but I don't agree with it anymore. I think you learn how and that people grieve differently, and they have their own loss that they're dealing with. And it
yeah,
is obviously a very different relationship. For them, it was their friend, their brother, their son, their boss, their workmate, whatever. To me, it was my husband
yeah, of
and our children's father.
course.
So you can't measure the way you grieve by the relationship that people have to this person. And all I had was I needed to learn to accept that people grieve differently.
Mm,
What hurt was when people judged me for the way I grieved.
mm,
That was the painful part. Not so
mm,
much that the friendship fell apart over it, but that they judged me for the way I grieved, not understanding or not making space for trying to understand why I was addressing grief with joy and with happiness.
mm,
I
mm.
would have loved for them to ask me for my reason why, the backstory, or to just hold space for me and listen.
Yeah, I mean, let me ask you to talk more about that, Marie. I mean,
Yes.
this is a big part of your program, isn't it? I mean, almost like letting the light in as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Celebrating the person's life. I mean, could you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I
Yeah,
really, I really do love sharing this message because I feel a lot of people need to hear it. It all basically started about 3 years before Rob actually passed. And I remember this so vividly because Rob had his way home from work was through the national park, a really beautiful road. But if there was an accident and it was closed, it was a huge detour. And one night, Rob rang me and said, "Babe, I'm going to be about 2 hours late. There was an accident on Heathcote Road." And I said, "Yeah, that's all right." For a lot of people, that would mean a huge inconvenience. Your husband's home late for dinner. Dinner's going to get cold, or you eat alone, or
mm,
he's not going to say goodnight to the boys, or whatever.
yeah,
That it usually is an inconvenience. 2 hours detour. For one young dad, it meant that he never made it home. He had a front-on car accident. With a truck, and he was killed on the scene. And his son was about 6 months old.
mm,
And when Rob and I learned about that very night, we had a conversation. We sat on our bed and we had the what if conversation. Like, what would you do if something was to happen to me or you? And still to this day, I am so grateful to have had this conversation because the outcome became my North Star in the
mm,
darkest hour. And that was, I would want you to create the happiest life possible for you and the boys.
mm,
We said that to each other because that's what love is. Love just wants you to be happy.
yeah,
And
of course.
that was so valuable to me. It is
Mm,
confronting,
mm.
but I can only urge anyone to have that conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, I have to say that conversation I think is so important, and people don't have it because, I mean, certainly, certainly in kind of in Western society, we just hide away from death and loss. I mean, it's an inevitable
Yeah.
part of all of our lives, isn't it? But people just
Yeah.
don't want to talk about it. So I really, really agree with that. But in terms of your grieving, you were judged then because you were really
Yeah.
wanting to engage with love and so
Yeah.
people judge that negatively, did they? Some people, I mean, at the time.
Never to my face.
Yeah, okay.
Really never to my face. But working in mindset, working with language, working with
Yeah,
such deep topics, you become a master in interpreting actions more than words,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I could tell that as I said, I'm very, very lucky, Mark. I had such a beautiful circle and still have a really beautiful circle of friends
Mm,
around me. And I was surprised with some of the actually three of my closest friends, really closest friends that are now not in my life anymore. very, very unfortunately. And at the same time, there were people coming out of the woodworks that I would have never considered
Mm,
or even thought about being there for me, and they held space like
mm,
troopers for me. And
mm,
here am I'm so aware of what I'm saying here because I really don't want to sound judgmental. And that's why I shared that with you before. It was a really hard lesson for me to learn, and it took me years to learn that I don't want to judge them for that. You know, they were just grieving Rob differently, and that's
mm.
okay. And I
Yeah.
really say wholeheartedly now, it's okay. And, you know, that the friendship is not there anymore. I think that is a lesson that I started learning in my early 30s. Not every friendship is meant to last.
Mm.
It's not an easy lesson
No,
to learn, but
no.
that is just part of life, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is also true, and that is a lesson that I've learned later in life as well, as an
Yeah.
aside. Yeah, I mean, we always think, friendships you pick up early on will last forever, but people
Yeah.
grow and change so much, don't they? Anyway, that's a
Yeah.
whole other topic.
Yeah,
I know.
absolutely.
I mean,
Could be another
I mean, in your TED talk, you talk about comparison battles, I think. So that
Yes.
I really had to bring in. I mean, what is that? What does that look like
Yeah.
for people that are experience loss?
Yeah. So I founded a movement that I ran for about 5 years. I
Mm,
closed it last year on Rob's fifth anniversary of passing. So it was a full circle moment for me. And in this movement, I took about 5,000 people onto their healing journey. And in my movement, it was really, really important for me. The title of the movement was Loving Life After Loss. So it was like a call to action. It also served as a filter. It really set the direction of the movement, I
yeah.
held it as a Facebook group, really. And when I looked into other Facebook groups that were related to grief, to widowhood, to any sort of loss, I literally felt I could not ever spend more than 5 to 10 minutes in those groups because it dragged me down.
Mm,
It was, as I said in my
mm,
TEDx talk, a comparison battle at its finest. Whose husband was younger, whose children were younger, whose children weren't even born yet, who never had the chance to have children, and
mm,
my husband suffered longer or died
mm,
faster, or everything was just about comparison. And I thought, what on earth are you doing, people? You're dragging each other down. You're battling over
yeah,
whose loss was worse or harder. And I'm like, you can't do that. You need to be there and hold space for each other,
yeah,
listen to each other, create that space where you can share your heart and you know you'll be understood and not
yeah.
compared with, you know. So that to me was really shocking to learn how much comparison there is in the world
Mm,
of grief.
mm,
And it's almost like when you hear pregnancy stories, you know, you're pregnant and all of a sudden everybody tells you the worst birth stories ever. I'm
yeah.
like, can you just keep them to yourself? I want to
Mm,
prepare myself for a
mm,
beautiful and easy and lovely
mm,
birth, and all I hear is negativity. That's the sort of thing where I'm like, no, 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 we need to hold space. We need to learn to hold
mm.
space and listen.
Yeah, to really honor everyone's experience. I mean, why would that be the comparison battles? I mean, do you think it's just a human condition? Or I mean, it does happen all over, doesn't it? This kind of thing.
I think there is two things, two sides to the story. One of them is nicer, one of them not so nice.
Yeah.
I think one part is that you need to be seen in your pain. So, you know, you share your story to be seen rather than, you know, letting one person talk and letting them be seen. There's this, I need to be seen in my pain too. But the other
Mm,
part is I want you to know that I hear you because I've been through it too.
mm.
You know,
Yeah.
there is this, I share my story so you understand that I hear you, but it doesn't come across that way. The
Mm,
other person doesn't go into, oh, so you understand too. They either then drop into this pool of suffering together, or the other person doesn't feel heard. Either or is not a good outcome. So again, coming back to when one person shares, please just listen. You know, in particular, when you've been through it, you know how much you need to be heard and not talked over or compared with.
yeah. And I'm sure, you'll agree with what I'm going to say now, but I think, people, I mean, we both will kind of work in the field, don't we? People will come and yes, there are things we offer tools and there's all sorts of things that we offer, but I have to
Mm.
say, Marie, a lot of the time, I think just holding the space, like you say, for
Yeah,
somebody to tell their story,
yeah, That's
sometimes,
that's
often, I think that's enough. You know,
yeah.
people just want to tell their story, don't they? You know, and it's so powerful to have someone that really, really listens and sees them. It's a massive part of someone's healing, I
It's
think,
so
isn't it?
beautiful that you
Yeah.
say that, Mike, because I hear so often, I don't know what to say.
Mm,
Just listen.
yeah. I mean,
If you don't know
absolutely.
what to say, just listen. That's my favorite one-liner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, can we talk a little bit around, well, all of the other things that you do, maybe your work? I mean, I just
Mm.
wondered whether you could say, well, just tell our listeners, this is a big question because I know you do a lot, but to tell our listeners a little bit around your work. I mean, you
Yeah.
work a lot in grief now, don't you?
Well, thank you for asking.
Yeah.
I work a lot in a space of healing. Yeah. People
Yeah.
always say, you work in
Sure.
grief. I'm like, no, I work in healing.
No. Okay,
Yes,
that's much
I
better.
know.
Yeah.
I know it's a bit of a twist on that thing, but I really do find it important to say that because I always say people don't need help in grief. They need help in healing. You know, we are
Yeah.
quite good in the whole being sad, the tears, all of that happens quite automatically anyway. It's a very human reaction to loss.
Yeah.
But what we haven't learned, what we haven't been really taught well in our society, in our community, is the whole, or culture, I should say, is the whole idea of let's celebrate that person's life.
Yeah.
Let's go into storytelling. I really want to hear stories about my husband. You know, I'm going to share this with you very quickly.
Mm.
Literally this week, or hold on, it's Monday, so a couple of days ago, it was last week. I got a phone call out of the blue and I almost didn't pick up because I thought, oh my God, another number I don't know. And I get so many phone calls of charity or whatever, where I'm like, sometimes you just want to switch your phone off at night and not pick it up.
Yeah.
But something prompted me to pick up the phone. I'm really grateful I did because this guy says to me, hi, it's Eddie Wallacek, and I'm like, Eddie, he said, I worked with your husband. I said, I know exactly who you are. Rob told me so many stories about Eddie, and every time he went to WA in Australia, the other side of Australia, for a business trip, he would catch up with him and they would share stories. And they, even way after they worked together, and just before he retired, Rob was so excited about telling me he's going to retire and he's so happy and we have to go and see him one day. And out of the blue, he rings me and says, I just wanted to check in with you how you are and how are the boys. And I said, I cannot begin to tell you how much this means to me that you ring me and ask me. And he said, I never stopped thinking about Rob. He was such a great guy, and I just wanted to tell you that. And I thought, that's what we need. Years and years into it, when all the support systems have fallen off,
Yeah.
that when I urge everyone, whoever is listening now, whoever is thinking of that one person who lost that one person, reach out to them and ask them, how are you going?
Mm.
And I want to tell you a story about your person because this and that keeps playing in my mind, in my memory.
Mm.
That's the most beautiful gift you can give to somebody.
Mm.
Share stories about that person. That's what we all need.
Yeah, and I really agree. And when you talk about, the support systems falling off, I mean, just
Mm.
to reference that, because something else I see with a lot of people that, have experienced loss, and I guess, in my own life when I've experienced losses, the support systems are there, early on. One would hope,
Mhm.
people lean in, yeah, people lean out as well, but one would hope there is some semblance of a support system. But after a few weeks or after a few months, everybody
Mm.
just moves on with
Mm.
their own lives. And I just see the support systems for the person that has experienced the loss breaking down and then perhaps isolation coming in. I mean, I think that happens a lot. And it really kind of, I don't know, associates to what you're saying around months and years later, somebody picking up the phone and referencing the
So
person and
beautiful.
telling a funny story, because it keeps the person present and alive. And do you think peace support systems do fall off too quickly for people that have experienced grief and loss generally?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I call it 369 done. So the first three
yeah,
months, have everybody rally together and support you and cook
yeah,
meals and cook in and
yeah,
give you a hug and talk to you.
yeah,
Then the 6 months mark is, where you have your closer circle, sort of the really
mm,
close circle stays around till about 9 months, and then the 12 months marker is like maybe there is the odd, or it's been a year and how are you going? The 1 year mark sort of triggers it, and that's it. Then the dust settles, and that's it. That's basically a sort of trend that I have noticed over and over with people I work with our own friends and family. And you know what? I remember my older son saying that to me once, and he said, Mum, I kind of feel that people have forgotten that dad passed. And I said to him, yes, I agree with that. And I said, because it's your dad and not theirs. And I
Yeah.
said, it's kind of normal, that that happens. And I wanted him to learn that and understand that so he wouldn't take it personal. Because I said, it's normal that people do move on because it's not affecting them in a way that it affects
Mm.
us. I said, imagine we would hold on to every single loss in our entire community. We would constantly be sad and heavy and
True. Yeah.
dragged down. And I said, it's a normal mechanism of your subconscious, of your soul, of your heart, wanting to be happy, wanting to heal, wanting to move forward. And so do we. We want to be happy. And of course, it affects us in a very different
Mm.
way because it was
Mm.
our person.
Yeah, I mean, does it leave people isolated, would you say, this 9 months is because I guess grief
Yeah.
takes I mean, often takes longer. When grief is a very complex thing, isn't it? And as you say, a very, very unique thing. But
It
when
is
yeah,
yeah. I don't really think there is a generic answer because the
okay,
generic answer would probably go into the direction of isolation more and more.
yeah,
However,
okay,
I feel so for me personally, it is more things like those first milestones. I remember, when my older son started driving a few months ago, I'm like, I wish Rob could be there and pick up the old plates with us. Meeting the parents of the girlfriend and you are sitting there on your own, things like that.
yeah,
I wish that Rob could be there with me. And at the same time, I know he is, on a spiritual
yeah,
basis. I know he's
yeah,
there.
yeah,
It's more the milestones, but I think this is where mindset comes in really
mm,
strongly. I have worked as a mindset coach for seven
mm,
and a half years before Rob died. And I have
mm,
to say, everything that I learned and taught has helped me so much
mm,
to look at things very differently and to learn to observe what's going on within me and to go into this outside perspective when
mm.
things get too intense, too
Yeah,
hard.
right,
And one thing I've noticed, and I have to say I'm really, really proud of myself that I've done that. I have not once thought of myself as, oh my God, poor me, I'm a sole parent. I've never felt like that. I have heard so many people say to me, it must be so hard as a sole parent. And I'm like, I never saw parenting as hard. Never.
mm,
I'm not saying it's not.
mm,
Absolutely not. I'm not saying parenting is not hard, but
mm,
I never thought of it from that perspective.
mm,
I've seen it as this is what parenting is. This is part of it. And yes, yes, absolutely, there are challenges. But I feel that how you approach things changes the things you approach, if that makes
oh,
sense. So
so
it
true,
really
yeah,
is something that I'm quite happy that I could take
mm,
that into the entire experience with me. It helped me tremendously
yeah.
to take it differently. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I totally agree. I mean, how we approach things, how we frame things, the stories we tell ourselves about things. I mean, they are the things that create our reality, aren't they? So, so I guess, the fact that you had already so much experience working as a mindset coach must have really helped you, really, in
Yeah.
those moments. And there is also something, I mean, this is, I say this a lot on the show about people transforming, not just grief about loss, but grief and trauma and difficult experiences into a kind of life of helping others, and this is so true of you, isn't it? You were already working as a mindset coach, but you've transformed, what was a terrible, unexpected loss into a kind of vocation of helping others, which I always think is absolutely wonderful. And kind of leading from that. Can I ask
Mm.
about? I'm going to ask a few things. Ask around some of the things you do. I mean, I
Really?
want to ask about your book first. Well, it's not just one book, right? Can you say a little bit around your work as an author and also tell our listeners how they get hold of the
Sure.
books and yeah.
Yeah, I have published 3 books. So the first one was Loving Life After Loss. That was then
Yep,
became the base for the movement Loving Life After Loss. I've
yep,
also written Happy Healing, which is all about, what happened after the first book, how did I turn it into a movement? But it
yep.
has also got 7 steps from grief to relief. It's a
Mm,
healing journey that I have created based on my own experience, on my very own steps, how I walked through
yeah,
grief
yeah.
with my children. And then when I archived the movement, I brought out a journal called Sparks of Joy. It's a self-prompted journal. There's a little line, little sparks of joy for every single day. And I love it because it's not just based for people grieving, just for people who need some more joy in their lives. So
Mm,
these were my books. I've also been published in a few other books as
yeah.
co-author. But for me, the biggest thing was I really wanted to continue in this whole paradigm shift of grief. That is my biggest thing. I want to bring more lightness into the space of grief. So
Yeah.
as of last year, I've decided to go into keynote speaking. I speak on the power of grief, how you can harness that primal force that you feel in a loss to actually rebuild yourself, to heal yourself. So that is my biggest thing.
Mm,
And yeah, my absolute mission is to bring that into the education space,
mm.
because teachers are not taught how to actually hold space and deal with
No.
grief in the classrooms. I was, on that receiving end of the principal, the teachers, and the school counselor ringing me, asking me for advice how they can help my sons. And I was like, this is the first time I've lost a husband. And
Yeah,
you asked me, I was hoping that at least the school counselor would know. Of course,
yeah.
she was building on, your kids better what they need. I get
Mm,
that. And it was a sort of,
mm,
let's do this together. But I was quite shocked. I don't know what the statistics are in
mm.
the UK, but here in Australia, it's 1 out of 20 kids lose one or both parents before they turn 18.
Yeah,
That's a huge
that's a
statistic when you
massive
think of
number.
it, to
Yeah.
not be taught
Mm,
to teachers. That's
mm,
quite intense. So for me, my two
mm,
favorite
mm,
areas that I want to bring this work
mm,
into is educational system and also the corporate space.
mm.
Nobody knows how to welcome somebody back from bereavement
Oh,
leave.
that's so
Bereavement
true.
leave is always too short. So
Mm,
I've sort of started building a network with people who work in that space, and I love
mm,
it. The more we can do this together, the better it
mm,
is. And it's all about mindset, perspective, and language, really.
mm. But I
Yeah.
have to say, I mean, what amazing work, because it's so true. Yeah, I mean, in the school space, I mean, I would say in multiple spaces, people just don't really know how to deal with grief. And I mean, you
Mm.
reference the corporate space. I mean, that is something that, yeah, that I see. People go back to work, and it's almost like people are dreading going back to work because
Yeah.
they're not entirely sure what kind of reaction they're going to get. And often,
And
I
they're also not
think
ready
the reaction's
emotionally.
terrible.
Um,
Often, people don't know what to say, and it all. I mean, it's just. I mean, what kind of
you do get
feedback?
the standard,
Yeah,
you get the my condolences or I'm sorry for your loss. And with that,
yeah,
you literally cut them off from community and you put them in a grief
yeah,
and then you avoid them. That's
yeah,
the usual go-to. And it's really sad because the
yeah,
person finds it already very confronting coming back into the workspace anyway.
yeah,
The first thing is they get this wall or this
mm,
wave of
mm,
sadness, and that's it. So
mm,
they're either running their face into the wall or they're getting
yeah,
drowned by this wave, and then they need to swim through that for the rest of the day. And it's
mm,
quite dreadful. It's really confronting for
mm,
people to come back to the workforce. They,
mm,
like everybody I've worked with, was really dreading that
yeah,
day of
yeah,
coming back to work.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
having to.
what kind of feedback do you get? Because I mean, I guess when you're doing your keynote speaking, when you work in corporations, when you're working, goodness me, it must be very powerful in the room sometimes. I mean, what kind of feedback do you get?
It is always, I have to say, extremely humbling and
Yeah,
honoring coming off stage, because there's usually a whole row of people waiting for me to
yeah,
hug me,
yeah,
to take
of
selfies, to
course.
thank me. There's always this,
Yeah,
oh my God, like I always want to go down and say, like, I'm one of you, like
mm,
they
yeah,
almost bow in front of me. And it humbles me because I can tell how much my work means to them, and
yeah.
it's showing me that I'm on the right path with that. And
Mm,
I know it sounds terrible coming from me because I'm not here to stroke my ego, but the reaction, the responses from people shows me how much it is needed
mm,
that we allow this topic to be
mm,
an, yeah, to be a more sociable topic where people don't shy away from it. That's the sort of thing that I want to get to. And I would love to sum this all up. My entire work is summed up in this one-liner that I came up with one day, and that is, we hurt, we heal, we grow, we teach. That to me is the essence of
Love that.
life.
Yeah.
When we get hurt, whatever we learn from it, we want to pass on to others so we can hold space
Yeah.
for them, so to make it easier for them. That's coming back to the essence of community, sharing stories, holding space for each other, looking after each other. We lost that a little bit, or a lot.
Yeah, I think we've lost that a lot, honestly. Yeah, and in terms of somebody talking about grief and loss, and we need more of that. It's
I
just hidden.
agree.
It's just hidden away, isn't it? It's just
Yeah.
in our society. It's just it's different. I think in different cultures to some extent, but in Western
Yeah.
culture, we just hide away from it, don't we? And it's such an important area to be spoken about, which is why I had to get you on the show. I mean, I think it's fantastic the work that you do. If people want to get hold of any of your books, or they want to get hold of you for any of the things that you offer loads of stuff, and we'll put all of your links up with the show notes. But how do they get hold of you, Marie?
I, I would say it two ways. The one thing
Yeah.
is definitely on my website, it's mariealessi.com, and the other one is I would love to take this opportunity to say, please follow me on YouTube, because I've now started this new podcast on YouTube,
Mm,
and I'm literally in the beginning stages of the subscribers here, but it's
great.
YouTube Marie Alessi, and it's literally just my handle. And if you could subscribe and follow me there, you can get
Yeah.
hold of every week I do an interview where, it's called Unsilence Grief. So it's really holding space for people to
Mm.
talk about their stories, but most importantly, how they got through it, how they healed and how they found ways to overcome and work and grow through adversity.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic. And as I say, we'll put all of your links up with the show notes and on those social media platforms. I mean, we're kind of nearing the end now. Is there anything that you would like to say that I've not given you the opportunity to today?
Well, you've given me beautiful opportunity to talk about
Oh,
pretty much
great.
everything. But
Yeah.
for me, I just want to leave your listeners with this one sentence:
Mm.
love just wants you to be happy. If ever you're stuck in adversity, in hurt, in loss, and in grief, and you don't know how to work through something, just look at it through the lens of love. From the perspective of love, there's always an answer there. What would love want you to do? That's my favorite shout out.
Yeah, I mean that's a really, really kind of lovely place to finish. Yeah, I think we'll finish there. And I just want to thank you, Marie, so much for coming on the show. Such an important show for our listeners. So thank you. And it's been great to meet you.
It was my absolute pleasure, and thank you for having me, Mark.
Yeah, thanks again to Marie for coming on the show. Listeners will remember that at the end of the last show, I did suggest that this show would be the season finale, which will be an episode with Joe, looking through the post bag, which we've not actually done before. So that should actually be quite a good finale to season 5. But I just had to get Marie on such an important area. And as we said on the show, an area that, is often not talked about, not understood, hidden certainly in Western culture, the power of grief. Um, Marie, as she said in the show, has written 3 books, contributed to numerous other books, is a TEDx speaker, a keynote note speaker. And as I said in the show, somebody that has transformed um, suffering into helping others. As Marie said, she had been working with mindset as a mindset coach for 7 years, leading up to the death of her husband, Rob. And I guess the understanding of mindset and mental health really helped her. As always, it would have been nice to have touched on other areas. I mean, I have been debating whether some of the podcasts should be longer, should be an hour. But I don't know, an hour is quite a long time, isn't it, to expect somebody to listen to a podcast. 40 minutes is, a good time, but I mean, as often happens to me on the podcast, I had lots of questions left to ask Marie. I mean, I wanted to ask about the stages of grief. I wanted to ask around anger and embracing anger, which I know is part of her program. And I wanted to ask more really about her programs. But listeners can check out all of the things Marie does, including her podcast, by checking out the show notes and checking out the notes, which will be with our social media sites. But a really, really important show and a fitting end to season 5. The next show, which will probably be next week, will actually be the season finale with Joe. We've gone slightly over the amount of episodes we normally do, but I've just been so blessed with such brilliant guests talking about such important areas that I have just, really had to squeeze more and more guests in. The subtitle of our season, as you know, is relationships. It's a very, very wide area, and hopefully we have done it justice with all of the different topics we've had on the show. If you are enjoying the show, please do subscribe. If you want to see the video format of the show, please do check out our YouTube channel, #psychotherapy and Mark Fielding. The listeners are going up a little bit on the YouTube channel, but it doesn't really get the hits that our audio podcast does. However, I'm putting up more and more shows. So if you would like to see the videos of the podcasts, then please do go onto YouTube. And please also give comments, and please do subscribe. Really important for us as a podcast that you subscribe. We've been entered in the Australian Podcast Awards. Be great if you're enjoying the show, if you could vote for us. Please find the links to vote with the show notes and on our various social media sites. It would be fantastic to get a decent amount of votes for the Australian Podcast Awards. And as our regular listeners will know, we do kind of straddle continents really here on this podcast. Joe living in Melbourne, Australia, me living in the UK. And we interview we've interviewed quite a lot of Australian guests this season, but we do have a mixture of Australian guests and UK guests. And, in this series and the past one, lots and lots of American guests, actually. Biggest amount of listeners is actually in the US, which is quite interesting. So it has been really, really good to have all of the guests being very generous with their time coming on the podcast and talking about what I think our listeners can only agree has been a wide lot of areas, all under the subtitle of relationships. So check out the season finale, which will probably be next week with Joe, where we'll be hitting the mailbag and looking to answer some of the comments and some of the questions that our listeners have sent in, emailed in, and sent in. Yeah, show my age now a little bit. Emailed in, and and commented. After the podcasts have gone up. So check that out. So thank you so much, Marie, again, for coming on the show. A brilliant show on such an important topic. And check out the season finale, which will probably be next week. So as always, thank you so much for listening to the show. Obviously, we wouldn't have a show without you. And do look after yourselves, look after each other, and do look after the planet. And I'll see you probably next week for the season finale. Thanks for listening.